I'd like to say it was a crisp autumn morning, the kind of morning where the sun spills pale gold across wet pavement, and the air smells faintly of damp oak leaves, but that would be a lie. In truth, it was my usual Wednesday, grey skies, the faint hum of traffic beyond my office window, and the lingering scent of stale coffee drifting from my patient waiting room. I sat behind my mahogany desk, straightening the stack of client files I'd already reviewed before breakfast. My name is Dr. Evelyn Hart, licensed psychologist, 20 years in private practice, and I've become quite adept at reading people, or so I believed. At precisely 9:02 a.m., I heard the soft click of the door latch. I looked up from my notes. A tall man in his early 30s stood in the threshold, hands shoved into the pockets of a charcoal overcoat. His hair was dark, curling slightly at the nape, and his eyes sharp, almost too aware bore into me as if anticipating my every reaction. He gave a polite nod, exposing a faintly crooked smile. "Good morning, Dr. Hart," he said, voice calm as a still pond. "I'm looking forward to our first session." His name was Mr. Adrian Cross, and according to his intake form, he sought help for recurring nightmares and crippling guilt stemming from an incident 2 years ago. But something about him unsettled me from the starter, subtle intensity in his posture, a precise confidence in his tone that hinted at both control and calculation. "Please," I gestured toward the leather armchair opposite mine, "have a seat." As he sat, I couldn't help but notice how perfectly he folded his coat and placed it on the back of the chair, as though every movement were premeditated. I sank into my own seat, nodded to my digital recorder on invisible witness and offered my customary opening. "Tell me what brings you here today." He paused, chin tilted slightly upward, as if weighing my words for hidden traps. "I've been having nightmares," he began, "but not the usual kind. They feel orchestrated, like someone else is writing the script." His lips curved into that same half smile. "I need to know why." I jotted a brief note. Nightmares described as orchestrated, possible PTSD, insomnia, explore cognitive patterns. But before I could speak, he continued, "And, Dr. Hart, I'm told you're very good at finding hidden motives. I need you to find mine." There it was, the first crack in the veneer of client-therapist boundaries. My pulse quickened for reasons I couldn't immediately identify. In over 2 decades, I'd encountered clients who tested limits, more time, pressed for personal details, even manipulated insurance to get extra sessions, but none had ever outright challenged me with such unsettling clarity. I leaned forward, matching his gaze. "We'll explore those nightmares, Adrian. We'll talk about what's happening in your life and the images that haunt your sleep. But therapy is a gradual process." He nodded, serene yet unreadable. "Of course." I began my usual intake protocol. Background, family history, medical issues. He answered each question with precision, as though he'd rehearsed every response. His voice never wavered. His emotions remained carefully buttoned down. I found myself scanning the corners of the room for clues of perhaps a telltale pulse in his throat, a tremor in his fingers, but nothing revealed itself. 20 minutes passed in this clinical rhythm, and I felt the familiar confidence of my expertise settle in. By now, I'd built enough rapport with countless clients to guide them past their guarded exteriors. Yet Adrian's defenses felt uniquely impervious. I tapped my pen against the notepad. "Adrian, when did these nightmares begin?" He paused again, turning his gaze toward the large window overlooking the courtyard below. He watched a solitary pigeon hop among fallen leaves, then said, 2 months ago. Shortly after my brother's death, I noted, brother passed, possible grief reaction, and asked the next logical question, tell me about your brother. He turned back to me, eyes bright but distant. Nick was my younger brother. He died in an accidental car crash. I survived, of course. They say I walked away with only a shattered wrist, but since that day I've felt hollow, as if something essential inside me was torn away. I felt the familiar tug of empathy, the cornerstone of my profession. Hollow, I repeated softly. And the nightmares, what do you remember? He leaned forward, hands clasped. I dream I'm walking down a corridor, white walls stretching on forever. At the end, there's a door, and I know behind it is the truth. Every time I reach for the handle, the walls start closing in. I wake up suffocating, a classic claustrophobia dream, symbolic of guilt or shame. As I began formulating cognitive reframing strategies, I sensed I was already a step ahead until he arched one brow. You think it's guilt, he said. Voice calm. But guilt for what? I paused, uneasy at the sudden shift. Adrian, therapists don't prescribe guilt. We help you understand and manage it. He smiled, a slow, almost predator's grin. What if I told you I'm not haunted by guilt over my brother's death? What if the real reason I'm here is something I did or didn't do, and I'm testing you to see if you'll find it? Silence settled like a heavy curtain. My pen hovered above the paper, words suddenly tangled in my throat. I'd anticipated fear, sorrow, maybe even anger, but never this. He was daring me to catch a hidden confession, daring me to prove my worth. I cleared my throat. Therapy is not a game, Adrian. His smile never faded. Maybe it's not a game to you, but it is to me, because if you uncover why I'm here, you might understand something that even I can't face alone. He leaned back, arms resting casually on the chair's arms. And that was the moment I realized this was no ordinary client. He was probing me, sizing up every reaction, and as a therapist trained to maintain the upper hand, I felt an unfamiliar shiver of doubt. I closed my notebook, turned off the recorder. Our time is up for today, I said, voice steady. Next session will continue. He stood smoothly, coat already in hand, and paused at the door. Thank you, Dr. Hart. I'll see you next Wednesday, same time. As the door clicked shut, I exhaled. My pulse had nearly doubled. I hadn't just met a troubled soul, stepped onto his stage. The real questions settled in my mind as I let out a slow breath. Who was manipulating whom? And, more unsettling still, why? I gathered my notes and looked at the empty chair. The echoes of his calm, controlled presence lingered in the air. This wasn't going to be a case I could solve with standard techniques. Adrian Cross had come seeking something darker, something I feared I was not yet prepared to confront. I switched off the desk lamp, packing away my pens. Tomorrow I'd review the details, prepare new strategies. But tonight I would lie awake, wondering what truths lay hidden behind his composed facade, and whether, by the time I discovered them, it would still be within my power to help him, or even to save myself. Ask ChatGPT. I arrived at my office the next Wednesday feeling as jittery as a first-year intern. Normally, I'd savor the 30 seconds of solitude before my first patient, smooth jazz playing softly from hidden speakers. The reassuring hum of the HVAC system, the faint scent of bergamot from my diffuser, calming frazzled nerves. But today, the office felt like a trap. Every polished surface, every strategically placed plant seemed to mock me. "You're in over your head, Evelyn." I poured myself a cup of black coffee, bitter fuel I rarely indulged in, and settled at my desk. The file on Adrian Cross lay open. My handwritten notes from our first session scrawled in the margin, "Testing me, hidden motive." I stared at that phrase until I could almost hear his voice challenge me again. Unbidden, my mind drifted back to last night's dream. In it, I was trapped in a darkened hallway lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different fragment of my face, some older, some younger, some twisted in fear. At the far end, a silhouette waited, motionless. I approached, heart thunderous, and reached out to touch the glass. The mirror shattered, its shards raining down in slow motion, and I woke, heart pounding, sweat-soaked. I shook off the residue of the dream as the digital clock blinked 8:58 a.m. time to prepare. I revisited the treatment plan I'd sketched. Quickly the night before, establish safety framework, reinforce boundaries, remind Adrian of the therapeutic contract, explore early memories, gently probe childhood trauma to identify triggers for nightmares. Cognitive reframing, introduce exercises to shift perspective away from guilt. I refolded my notes, slid them into the file, and slipped it into my briefcase. On my way to unlock the door, I paused to glance at the framed degrees on the wall, proof of every year of study. Every sleepless night passing exams, every professional triumph. I took a steadying breath. You've handled difficult cases before. You can handle this one. At 9 a.m. sharp, Adrian stepped in, wearing the same charcoal overcoat and that knowing smile. It struck me, even before he spoke, that he was more the conductor of our sessions than I was. He greeted me with a nod and a deliberate calm, as though he'd been waiting at the edge of a stage, ready for the next act. "Good morning, Dr. Hart," he said. His voice held no trace of yesterday's uncertainty, only certainty. "Good morning, Adrian. Please, have a seat." I gestured to the chair. He sat and folded his coat exactly like before, as if by rote. I flipped open my file and set the recorder to session 2. The red light blinked. "Last time, you mentioned your nightmares feel orchestrated. Today, I'd like to delve into what's happening in your real life. Are there events or memories you've been avoiding?" He studied me, his gaze settling on the polished edge of my desk. I fought. The urge to smooth my hair, to mask the nervous tremor I felt in my voice. "I've been thinking," he began slowly, "about the accident that killed my brother. You said therapy is gradual, but I don't have gradual. I need answers now." His demand felt like a gauntlet thrown at my feet. "Therapy isn't about finding quick answers, Adrian. It's about exploring at a pace that's safe and sustainable." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes bright with purpose. "Safe for whom? Because I'm told you're an expert at seeing the truth behind lies." I closed my file, hands steady on its cover. "I see what you show me. Beyond that, we need time." He sat back, unperturbed. "Time is what I don't have." The clock ticked. I needed a bridge, a way to shift our dynamic back to war cooperation. "Let's try an exercise," I suggested, pulling a folded worksheet from my briefcase. "It's called memory mapping. You'll draw out, on paper, significant events in your life, starting with childhood and leading up to your brother's accident. Then we can see patterns, triggers." He took the paper, unfolded it with deliberate care, and let it rest on his lap. "I'll try," he said. Over the next 20 minutes, Adrian filled the map with neat, precise handwriting. Dates, places, faces sketched like forensic evidence. I watched as he paused over one entry. Summer, '08, Camp Redwood, age 15, before moving on. I seized the moment. Camp Redwood, what happened there? His pen hovered. My brother and I went as counselors in training. There was an incident. He folded his lips inward. A boy drowned. I tried to save him. I couldn't. I felt a pang of empathy. His guilt was deeper than I realized. "Tell me about that day," I urged softly. He met my eyes, and for a flicker of time, the composed mask slipped. His eyes glistened. I was supposed to be the one with the lifeguard certification, but I didn't feel like a lifeguard. Felt like a kid. I watched him drown. I nodded, voice gentle. That must have been terrifying. He exhaled, shoulders dropping for a moment. It was then his gaze sharpened. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" I paused, unsure if he had read my notes or simply deduced from my reaction. "I only know what you share," I reminded him, trying to reclaim authority. He leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling tiles. "Fine, but your notes say possible PTSD, survivor's guilt. That's clinical shorthand, not the real story." Adrian's confrontation forced me to reflect. Was I hiding behind professional jargon to avoid engaging with the raw human pain beneath? I closed my eyes briefly and said, "PTSD and guilt can manifest in nightmares. Our work is to connect the Tuther event and the dream." He glanced at the recorder, then at me. "What if I fabricated my nightmares to make you chase shadows?" The question landed like a stone in my gut. "You're testing me again," I said, tone even. He nodded slowly. "I need to know if you see the difference between what's real and what's planted." I leaned forward, matching his intensity. "Therapy isn't about tricks, Adrian. It's about trust." He stared at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to believe. Then he picked up the map, folded it, and placed it back in the folder. "Next week," he said quietly, "we go to Redwood Lake. I want you to be there with me." I closed my mouth against the shock of his request, inviting me to a site of trauma that was beyond the usual scope of sessions. "That might be difficult," I said carefully, "but let's discuss what you hope to achieve there." He stood, coat in hand, eyes locking with mine. Closure. I watched him leave, heart pounding once more. I'd crossed into uncharted territory, my professional boundaries blurred by his insistence. I flipped off the recorder and sank into my chair, sweat pooling at my temples. A file lay open before me, but my mind raced far beyond the words on paper. Adrian knew how I thought. He manipulated my own techniques against me, and now he wanted me by his side at the lake where his guilt was born. I gathered my things, breathing out a slow, deliberate exhale. Tomorrow, I'd review the ethics guidelines and prepare my countertransference strategy. I'd consult a colleague, anyone, before agreeing to this excursion. But as I locked the door behind me, I felt the tug of curiosity, the pull of professional pride. I was a therapist. It was my job to guide people through their darkest moments. If Adrian wanted me at Redwood Lake, then Redwood Lake is where I'd go. Because in my line of work, fear is a compass knot, a barrier, and I intended to follow where it pointed, no matter how deep the water, no matter how sharp the pain. Ask ChatGPT. I barely slept the night before our scheduled visit to Redwood Lake. My mind raced with questions about ethics, liability, and the thin line between therapeutic support and personal involvement. I paced my bedroom, tugging at the collar of my silk sleep shirt, imagining every possible scenario. Adrian collapsing at the water's edge, reliving his brother's final moments. Me stumbling over my own emotions, forcing me to confront memories I'd long buried. By dawn, I decided on a compromise. I'd agree to accompany him under one strict condition. Before setting foot on the property, we'd draft a supplemental consent form outlining the purpose, potential risks, and a clear agreement that this would be a supervised, one-time field session. It wasn't standard practice, but neither was inviting a therapist into the heart of a client's trauma. Boundaries were my safety net, and I wasn't about to let them dissolve. At 7:30 a.m., I met Adrian in the parking lot of my practice, the cold morning air crackling with tension. He stood beside a sleek black sedan, hands in his pockets, breath visible in the chill. He nodded once at my approach, as if greeting an old accomplice. "You brought the form?" he asked. I held out the paperwork, crisp and neatly typed. "Please read and sign this before we proceed," I said, refusing to soften my tone. He took the document, scanning it with the same intensity he applied to my every reaction. His lips quirked, very procedural. "I want clarity," I replied. "For both our sakes." He signed without hesitation. His signature, a neat flourish, seemed almost too practiced. I watched him hand back the form, then slipped it into my briefcase. The drive to Redwood Lake was silent, save for the steady rumble of the engine and the occasional scrape of tires on damp asphalt. I kept my eyes on the road, resisting the urge to check my side mirror for any sign of his hidden agenda. The route wound through dense forests, towering pines blotting out the morning light, until finally an expanse of mist-shrouded water appeared through a gap in the trees. Redwood Lake looked deceptively serene, glassy surface gently lapping at a narrow strip of rocky shore. A lone dock jutted into the water, weathered wood bleached by years of rain and sun. I parked beneath a grand old cedar, its roots knotted, like arthritic fingers. Adrian stepped out, coat buttoned high against the chill. He turned to me, expression inscrutable. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. There was no trace of his earlier bravado, just a fragile vulnerability that tugged at something deeper within me. "You're welcome," I replied, gathering my bag and the small backpack I'd packed with water, a first aid kit, and the usual therapy supplies: pens, notebook, voice recorder. I added my own penlight and extra gloves, more out of habit than expectation. We walked to the dock in silence, wooden planks creaking underfoot. I noticed how Adrian's gaze lingered on the water, on the spot where, 2 years ago, his brother slipped beneath the surface. His breathing was measured, controlled, but I caught the slight hitch in his chest as he stood at the edge. "Do you remember the exact spot?" I asked, keeping my voice low so the lake would carry it. He nodded, stepping to the right, counting off paces with his heel. 15 steps from the end of the dock," he said, "right past that loose board." He reached down, lifted a narrow plank with a gloved finger, and set it back in place. He was standing there when he slipped. I knelt beside him, peering at the grain of the wood. The dampness had turned it a dull grey, but I could see the crack where the board had splintered. "And you tried to catch him?" I prompted. He stared at the water, eyes fixed on some point beneath the surface. "I did. I reached for him, but I panicked." He rubbed his temples. "I lost focus, then I just watched him go." I placed a hand on his shoulder gently. Survivor's guilt often magnifies our perceived failures. It tricks you into believing you had complete control. He closed his eyes and swallowed. But I had the life jacket. It was in his hand. If I'd pressed the button, it would have inflated. His voice cracked. I forgot. I felt a pang for him, not just as a clinician, but as a fellow human being who'd made her own share of mistakes. Yet I reminded myself to remain professional. We'll work through that, Adrian. Today isn't about fixing the past. It's about facing it. He opened his eyes, meeting mine. Then let's begin. I retrieved the recorder and clicked it on. The red light blinked. Field Session 1, I announced. Dr. Hart with Adrian Cross at Redwood Lake, October 12th. His jaw clenched. I continued. Tell me what you feel right now, standing where he died. He inhaled sharply, gaze drifting over the rippling water. It's cold, he said, voice low, like a blade pressed against my skin. He glanced at the horizon, where the mist blurred the line between water and sky. I feel unworthy of this calm. I nodded, letting my words land before probing further. Unworthy in admission that spoke to his inner torment. Why unworthy? He closed his eyes, shoving both hands into his pockets. When he spoke again, his voice was distant, because the water was peaceful then. I remember the sunlight through the trees, the birds singing. He loved that lake. It was his sanctuary, and I took it away. I could almost see the scene. He described the laughter that once resonated here, now replaced by a silence that bore witness to tragedy. You didn't take it away, Adrian, I said quietly. Nature took him. Accidents happen. His laugh was brittle, humorless. Tell that to his mother. My chest tightened. This was more than therapy. It felt like a trial. I opened my notebook and scribbled. Countertransference alert impact of client's grief on therapist. I drew in a breath. Adrian, I want you to place your hand over your heart. He complied, eyes on mine. Close your eyes, I instructed. Feel your heartbeat. Let it remind you that you're alive. He exhaled, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Alive, he whispered, more to himself than to me. I allowed a moment of silence, letting the ripple of our combined breaths become the sessions. Pulse. Then I guided him through a grounding exercise, naming 5 things he could see, 4 things he could touch, 3 things he could hear, 2 things he could smell, and 1 thing he could taste. His voice, when it emerged, was steadier. I see the moss on the cedar tree, the loose plank, the grey sky, the ripples on the water, my own reflection. And what can you touch? I prompted. He ran his fingers along the rough wood, the splinter, the knot in the board, the cuff of my coat, the cold air on my face. Step by step, he found his way back to the present. The raw guilt softened, replaced by a tentative acceptance of his surroundings. I observed the shift with professional satisfaction and a growing awareness of my own emotional response. As we wrapped up the field session, Adrian turned to me, eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. Thank you, he said simply. I clicked off the recorder and packed my gear. Standing beside him, I gazed over Redwood Lake one final time. The water was no longer a threat. It was a mirror reflecting both of us two people, haunted and healing in equal measure. Tomorrow, we'd return to the safety of my office. But today, we'd reclaimed a piece of his shattered past. And in doing so, I felt the first tremor of hope in weeks, both for Adrian and, perhaps, for myself. Ask ChatGPT. Back in my office the following Monday, the polished veneer of therapy reclaimed its familiar, rhythm-smooth leather chairs, muted earth tones, the soft hum of air through the vent. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted for both of us. Adrian Cross entered with the same calculated calm, though his shoulders sat a fraction lower, as though carrying slightly less weight. I greeted him with a nod and offered a fresh pot of herbal tea, a calming chamomile blend I reserved for breakthroughs. He accepted without comment and sat, peeling steam-warmed fingers around the delicate porcelain cup. I waited, letting the silence settle. "I've been thinking about Redwood Lake," he said finally, voice low, "about how close we came to what happened that day." His eyes held a flicker of vulnerability I'd rarely witnessed. I leaned forward. "Tell me more." He took a slow sip of tea. When I stood there, I felt something shift. The guilt softened just enough for me to remember the good times. He traced a finger along the rim. "Nick and I would race kayaks on that water, even after dark, laughing until we couldn't breathe." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. And now, his gaze dropped to his hands. "Now I can't think of joy without the shadow of loss. Joy feels like betrayal." I jotted joy equals betrayal and looked up. "That's survivor's guilt lashing out. You think being happy means you're dishonoring his memory." He pressed his lips together and shook his head. "No, I need to be happy again. But on my terms." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "That's why I brought you to the lake." I set down my pen, intrigued by the shift in his tone. "And what terms are those?" He leaned back, folding his arms. "I needed you to see the real me, beyond the polished client image, to walk through my fear with me." I felt a mixture of pride and unease. Clients often sought my empathy, few demanded active participation in their trauma. "What did you learn?" I asked. He paused, swirling the tea. "That you're not infallible, that your carefully maintained boundaries can be crossed when someone knows how to push." His lips curved into that half smile again. "You had to sign the consent form. You had to plan the session. You gave me every tool to manipulate the situation." I inhaled sharply. "Manipulation isn't our goal, trust is." He set the cup down lightly. "You talk about trust," he said, voice edged, "but you used that form to protect yourself. You weren't trusting me, you were protecting your license." The accusation stung. I prided myself on empathy, on building genuine connections. But he was right. I had drawn a legal boundary before stepping into his pain. I closed my eyes, acknowledging my own defensiveness. When I spoke again, my voice was quieter. "I need to feel safe in my role. Without safety, I can't help you." His gaze softened. "And what if safety means letting go of control?" I held his gaze, feeling the weight of his question. Therapy was a delicate balance of power. I guided, clients followed. By inviting me into his world, he disrupted that balance. And now he was challenging me to relinquish some control. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Explore Power Dynamics Therapist. V's, client." Then I looked at him and said, "Power can be shared, but it requires boundaries that we both respect." He nodded slowly, agreed. "So here's my proposal. I'll share my files with you. All the details, every journal entry, every recording. You get full access. In return, you agree to sessions outside the office when I request them." I swallowed. Full access to personal journals was unconventional, but part of me recognized the opportunity. "I need time to consider that," I said honestly. He stood, gathering his coat. "Consider quickly, Dr. Hart, my next request isn't for the lay kids. For the courtroom. His eyes held a glimmer of challenge. Because I think what happened to me and what I've done belongs in a trial, not just in therapy. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? He paused at the door. You'll see. And with that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. I sat in silence, heart pounding. Adrian had raised the stakes. Now the boundary between therapy and legal obligation trembled. He was planning something that transcended nightmares and guilt, something that might implicate both of us. I reached for my phone and dialed my colleague, Jenna Pierce, a forensic psychologist who specialized in criminal cases. When she answered my shaky voice and I explained Adrian's proposal, I could practically hear her eyebrows lifting. Evelyn, she said, after a long pause, this is unusual, but there could be value in reviewing his records. If you can balance confidentiality with ethical practice. I rubbed my temples. He wants me to participate in his legal strategy. If I decline, he may see me as just another obstacle. Jenna's voice was firm. Don't let him manipulate you. Consult an ethics board before you hand over any records, and get his explicit consent in writing, with clear limits on how the information will be used. I swallowed hard, realizing Jenna was right. I needed to protect myself and uphold my duty to the profession. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. That afternoon, I drafted 2 documents, a detailed informed consent addendum outlining the scope of record sharing, and a letter to the State Board of Psychology requesting guidance on field sessions and document disclosure. Then I scheduled an urgent meeting with my practice's legal advisor. As I worked, memories of my own past surfaced, times I'd blurred boundaries, let clients into my personal life, only to regret the fallout. The fear that I might fall into the same trap with Adrian clenched my stomach. When he returned the next session with a sheaf of journals and legal briefs, I presented the consent addendum. His eyes flicked over the text. You drive a hard bargain, he said softly, then signed without hesitation. It was a small victory, but one that reminded me of my own agency. In the delicate dance of therapy, I had to keep one foot firmly planted on the ground even as Adrian invited me to step into darker territory. We closed that session with a plan. He would grant me full access to his personal records, and I would continue to navigate both therapy and legal waters with him. As I escorted him to the door, I felt the full weight of what lay ahead, a journey through trauma, morality, and the hidden motives that bind us all. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the next steps would test not only Adrian's resolve, but my own. I sat at my desk late that night, the office lamps casting long shadows over the scattered journals Adrian had entrusted to me. Their leather covers were embossed with his name in gold script, each a silent testament to his meticulous nature. I ran a fingertip over the spine of the first volume before cracking it open. His handwriting was precise, almost clinical. Dates, times, descriptions, every emotion catalogued like a scientist observing a specimen. I turned to an entry dated 2 nights before our field session at Redwood Lake, October 10th, 10:47 p.m. The dream returned. I was back in that corridor, the walls inching closer. Only this time, at the end of the hall, I saw her, my therapist. Her face was calm, unreadable, as though she knew exactly what I was afraid of. A knot tightened in my stomach. My own image haunting his nightmares. Had I been inadvertently shaping his subconscious? I flipped to my annotations from our first 2 sessions, searching for any language or phrasing that might have seeped into his dreamscape. Every note was professional, objective. But now I questioned whether my ever-present recorder, my clinical detachment, had become part of his internal darkness. Late into the night, I moved slowly through the journals. One by one, entries detailed his brother's accident, his childhood trauma at Camp Redwood, and an emergence of something darker, a plan. In an entry marked November 2nd, he wrote, "I've arranged the meeting. The one who caused Nick's death must be held accountable. The insurance company, the coroner, even my own parents, they've gathered evidence against them all." My heart pounded. Evidence against his parents, a coroner. This was no ordinary grief. He was orchestrating a reckoning. I felt a surge of professional alarms. This crossed well beyond therapy into potentially criminal territory. I pressed my fingertips to my temples. I needed to know how far he intended to go and whether I was complicit simply by listening. I flipped ahead to his most recent entry, November 12th, 11:03 p.m. tomorrow. I will confront Dr. Hart with everything. She has seen my journals, heard my confessions. If she refuses to help me bring this to light, I will take matters into my own hands. A bead of sweat trickled down my spine. Adrian wasn't just testing me, he was cornering me. If I didn't align with his mission, he threatened action. But what action? Releasing his own confession to the wrong hands. Heading straight to law. Enforcement with my therapist's notes. Breaking attorney-client privilege. Or something more sinister, born of his obsessive need for justice. I closed the last journal with a thud. The implications swirled like a maelstrom. Therapeutic confidentiality versus public good. His victims might deserve exposure. My ethical duty to protect his privacy against potential danger if evidence was mishandled. My own safety threatened by his ultimatum. My phone buzzed an email from the State Board of Psychology with preliminary guidance. They reminded me, client's written consent is required for record disclosure. Never release notes without explicit, informed, and revocable permission. Seek legal counsel before any action that may breach confidentiality. I took a deep breath and drafted an urgent message to Adrian. Dr. Cross, I've reviewed your journals. Before we proceed, I need to clarify the scope of our agreement. Let's discuss this in our next session to ensure we maintain ethical and legal boundaries. Dr. Evelyn Hartai hit send and leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me. The silence pressed in, filled with the weight of what lay ahead. Tomorrow, I'd face Adrian again, armed with legal opinion and my own resolve. The next morning, I arrived early. The office lights flickered to life as I prepared, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I had laid out 3 documents on my desk: the signed consent addendum, a summary of the State Board's guidance, and a typed outline of questions to negotiate the safe handling of his evidence. I wouldn't be bullied into complicity or betraying his trust without safeguards. At exactly 9 a.m., Adrian entered with his trademark poise, but his eyes were hard, determined. He donned his coat and sat, watching me arrange the papers. I gave him a measured smile. Good morning, Adrian. I've reviewed your journals and consulted with the board. We need to discuss your plan and how you'd like to proceed. His lips curled into a small, knowing smile. I knew you'd come around. I slid the first document toward him. This consent addendum outlines how your records can be used strictly for therapeutic or legal consultation, with documented permission, each time you disclose to a third party. He picked up the paper, scanning its clauses, very thorough. I continued, the board advises that any action beyond therapy is submitting evidence to authorities. for example, requires clear, revocable consent and a formal third-party request. I can't hand over journals without being part of a legal counsel framework. His gaze sharpened. Then we'll find that framework. I'll hire an attorney. You'll coordinate with them. I met his gaze evenly. I can help connect you with a forensic consultant, but I must maintain my role as your therapist. If I become a legal agent, I must cease therapy immediately. Adrian's eyes flickered. He set down the consent form. You're protecting yourself. I'm protecting both of us and our professions, I replied. I'll continue therapy, help you process your trauma, and coordinate referrals, but I cannot serve two masters. He leaned forward, hands clasped. And if I refuse? I felt a chill, but stood firm. Then we remain within our current therapeutic boundaries. You're free to pursue legal action independently, but I cannot facilitate it beyond the scope of therapy. Silence stretched. Then, in a low voice, he said, I understand. I exhaled, sensing a fragile détente forming between us. He slid the signed addendum back to me. Thank you, I said quietly. He nodded, eyes meeting mine with an intensity that bordered on gratitude. I'll see you next week, Dr. Hart. As he left, I sat back, pulse finally slowing. I'd confronted his ultimatum and held my ground. But the path ahead was perilous, balancing my ethical duties, supporting his need for justice, and safeguarding both our well-being. Leaning over my desk, I tapped my pen against the notebook. Therapy had become a battlefield, an arena where trust, manipulation, morality, and law intertwined. And I, Dr. Evelyn Hart, had to navigate every twist without losing sight of who I was. Because somewhere in Adrian's meticulously penned pages lay a truth that could shatter us both, and I was determined to uncover it, on my own terms. My office felt unnaturally still when I arrived the morning of Adrian's 6th session. The familiar scents, warm vanilla from the candle, faint notes of lavender, did little to soothe the knot in my stomach. I'd spent the previous evening reviewing legal precedents on therapists' involvement in evidence collection and drafting a confidentiality protocol stricter than anything I'd used before. Boundaries had become my shield, but each layer felt thinner under Adrian's relentless pressure. At precisely 9 a.m., he entered, carrying a single manila folder. His coat was gone now, replaced by a charcoal grey sweater that matched the brooding atmosphere outside. He paused in the doorway, eyes flicking to the stack of documents laid on my desk. Good morning, Dr. Hart, he said, voice steady. Then, after a moment's hesitation, I brought you something new. He set the folder before me. I've finalized my evidence, he continued. Names, dates, transcripts, everything compiled. I need your expertise to interpret the psychological elements, to show intent and motive. I swallowed, steeling myself. Adrian, my role is to help you understand your own mind, not to testify in court. He met my gaze, unblinking. You. Remember the journal entry where I wrote, if she refuses, I'll take matters into my own hands. That was me testing the boundary. But now I need more than therapy. I need you, Evelyn. His use of my first name struck me like a lightning bolt. He rarely used it in sessions, preferring the clinical Dr. Hart. This shift signaled something deeper, desire to collapse the professional distance between us. I affixed my gaze to the edge of the folder. I've consulted with a forensic psychologist. If you wish to use psychological analysis in a legal setting, you must formally retain a consultant. I can refer you but cannot assume that role." He let out a slow breath, exhaling through pursed lips. "Then refer me." I nodded, standing to retrieve his file. "I'll prepare the referral today. But you must understand, once I hand you that referral, our relationship shifts. I'll no longer be solely your therapist. Any analysis I provide becomes part of the legal record." He leaned back, fingers interlaced. "I accept that. I want transparency." I slid the referral letter across the desk. "Here, Dr. Jenna Pierce is a certified forensic consultant. She analyzes your records, interview you, and prepare a report. I'll continue therapy, but she'll handle the legal aspects." Adrian picked up the letter, scanning its contents. "Thank you," he said simply. As he set the letter aside, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. We had re-established a division of labor, but at what cost? The boundary was drawn in ink, but could it withstand his determination? I pressed the recorder's button. "Session 6, I announced. "Dr. Hart with Adrian Cross." The red light blinked. I began with my standard grounding question. "How have you felt since our last session, knowing the referral is in place?" He considered the question, tapping a thumbnail against the folder. "Relieved," he admitted, "but also exposed. I realized that sharing my sister's letters, my parents' testimonies, even my own private fears, it all becomes public. I'm vulnerable in a new way." I nodded. "Vulnerability is difficult, but necessary for healing." He raised an eyebrow. "Healing or prosecution?" His tone was light, but I sensed the underlying tension. I paused. "Our work isn't about prosecution. It's about your journey toward resolution. Whether that resolution happens through therapy, the legal system, or both, is up to you." He closed his eyes, as though weighing invisible scales. "I'm here because I want justice for Nick, but I also want to forgive myself." His confession struck me. Justice and forgiveness, two sides of the same moral coin. He had assembled a litany of grievances: negligent coroners' reports, insurance foul play, parental cover-ups, all legitimate targets. Yet beneath it was a deeper wound roiling within him, the pain of self-condemnation. "Tell me about forgiveness," I prompted. He folded his hands on the folder. "I think forgiveness isn't letting go of justice. It's finding peace despite it." His voice cracked, vulnerability surfacing. "I want to hold those who harmed Nick accountable, but I also want to free myself from the prison of guilt." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "That's a profound realization, Adrian. Justice can be pursued while you learn to forgive yourself. They're not mutually exclusive." He exhaled, shoulders loosening. I never thought to frame it that way. I was obsessed with proving my anger was righteous. I offered a small smile. "Anger can fuel action, but without release, it becomes a chain." He nodded. "So I need to open the chain with forgiveness, even as I pursue accountability." Silence settled comfortably between us, a sign that trust was growing. I sensed that beneath his calculated exterior, a genuine desire for healing had emerged, albeit alongside his unyielding quest for retribution. I clicked off the recorder. "We'll continue exploring these themes," I said. "Next week, let's examine specific memories of Nick, both joyful and painful, to chart a path toward balanced mourning." He stood, tucking the referral letter back into his folder. "Thank you, Dr. Hart." As he left, I watched the door close softly behind him. The day's breakthroughs left me both hopeful and wary. Adrian was still orchestrating our sessions, but now with a clarity of purpose that transcended mere manipulation. I gathered my notes and lingered at the window, watching the city's bustle below. The boundary we'd drawn had held for now, but the moral terrain ahead remained treacherous. Balancing justice and forgiveness, therapy and legal action required a precision as fine as a surgeon's scalpel. And I knew, deep within, that the next steps would demand every ounce of my professional integrity and my compassion to guide us both through the mirror of intentions. You said. I arrived early that Thursday. The late winter sun slanted through the blinds in pale stripes across my desk. I settled into my chair and arranged the printed excerpts from Adrian's journals. Next to my notes from session 6, each page bore the weight of his pain and the precision of his intellect. As I refreshed my coffee, I reminded myself this session would focus on integrating his dual quests, justice and forgiveness, into concrete therapeutic goals. At precisely 9 a.m., Adrian entered. He seemed energized, as though our last conversation had unlocked something within him. He wore a charcoal turtleneck that complemented his thoughtful grey eyes, but his usual composure had softened into a hint of anticipation. "Good morning, Dr. Hart," he said, closing the door behind him. He carried his usual folder, but this time, a slim stack of photographs peeked from under the flap. "Good morning, Adrian," I replied, gesturing for him to sit. "How have you felt since we spoke about justice and forgiveness?" He perched on the edge of the chair, leaning forward. "Clearer," he admitted, "but I've been revisiting memories of Nick, our childhood, the summer nights, the mistakes we made. Together, I want to bring those to life, not just in words, but visually." I nodded. Visual processing can be powerful. "What did you bring?" He set the folder on my desk and opened it, revealing a series of photographs. A canoe tipped in shallow water, 2 kayaks on a dock, a younger Adrian and Nick smiling at a campsite, lantern light glowing. "I had them developed last night," he said. "I thought we could use them for a guided imagery exercise. Step into those moments, relive the joy alongside the sorrow, and find a balanced narrative." I appreciated his initiative. "That's an excellent idea. We'll start with the happiest memory first, then gently introduce the harder ones. Are you comfortable with that?" He exhaled, fingertips resting on the photos of the 2 boys by lantern light. "Yes," he said softly. "I want to remember the laughter before the loss." I clicked on my recorder. Session 7. Guided imagery with photographs. The red light blinked. I guided him through a relaxation exercise, muscle release, slow breathing, and watched his tension dissolve. When his breathing evened, I handed him the first photograph, the boys smiling by lantern light. "Describe what you see," I prompted. He studied the image. "It's summer dusk. Lantern's glow warms our faces. I'm holding Nick's hand. I remember the smell of pine needles, the crackle of the fire." His voice trembled into a smile. He told me he wanted to explore the woods alone. I joked that he'd get lost. I encouraged him to close his eyes and imagine stepping into the scene, feeling the warmth, hearing the night sounds, smelling pine and wood smoke. He kept his eyes closed, nodding as if submerged in memory. After 5 minutes, I gently said, "Now hold on to that warmth and bring in the memory of the accident." His eyelids fluttered. He shifted, opening his eyes, then closed them again. I handed him a photograph of the tipped canoe in shallow water, the scene of the near accident earlier in his childhood. He drew in a breath that became a tremor. The kayak flipped. I was too slow. Water filled my nose. His voice broke. He laughed through the panic, telling me to hold his hand. The memories surged between joy and terror. I guided him back to the lantern scene, weaving warmth through the fear. You're safe here. The lantern still glows. You can reach for Nick's hand again. He inhaled, clutching the photos. When he opened his eyes, tears glistened. I'm alive, he whispered. He's alive in my memory. He paused, voice stronger. I forgave myself for that. I nodded, recording the breakthrough. That's significant, Adrian. You've reclaimed joy and acknowledged your role. How does that sit with your need for justice now? He leaned back, wiping his cheeks. Justice isn't about punishing that boy or my parents who covered up the faulty dock repairs. It's about acknowledging harm and ensuring it never happens again. His voice held a quiet conviction. I set the photos aside. So your definition of justice has evolved. It's systemic change rather than retribution. He smiled, relief in his eyes. Yes, I want to advocate for safer camps, better inspections. Awareness. I want Nick's death to mean something positive. I felt a surge of pride. This was the moral complexity he'd hoped to achieve. That's a powerful path. It honors his memory while freeing you from vengeance. He nodded. I want to collaborate on a plan, a way to turn my evidence into advocacy materials. Educational pamphlets, meetings with camp directors. You could help me refine the messaging. I paused. His request was reasonable, aligned with his healing. But it edged close to our earlier boundary, moving from therapy into active collaboration. I took a breath. I'm happy to support you in developing advocacy strategies as part of your therapeutic plan. We'll define clear steps, content outlines, messaging goals, and timelines. But remember, my role remains therapeutic. I won't sign legal documents or represent you in court. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. I understand. Therapy as guide, not counsel. I clicked off the recorder. Then let's co-create. Your advocacy project. We'll draft objectives today. Target audience, key messages, distribution channels. For the next 40 minutes, we transformed his needs into an action plan, a presentation for camp administrators, a draft petition for safety regulations, and a vision for a charitable foundation in Nick's name. Each idea sprang from the balanced space between justice and forgiveness we'd crafted. As he packed up to leave, Adrian looked at me with gratitude I hadn't noticed before. Thank you, Evelyn, he said, using my first name again, for guiding me toward a path that doesn't destroy me. I stood, offering a warm smile. You did the work, Adrian. I'm here to help you walk your path safely. He nodded, eyes earnest. See you next week, Doc. After he left, I exhaled deeply. This session had been a turning point. He'd shifted from retribution to positive action, and I'd navigated the fine line between therapy and collaboration. The boundary held, but I knew vigilance was essential. Leaning back, I watched the sunlight fade. The path ahead would require continued clarity and integrity. But for the first time, I felt hopeful for Adrian's healing, and for the possibility that even the darkest narratives can find redemption in purpose. I arrived at the office the following Thursday with a sense of cautious optimism. The advocacy project we'd begun drafting policy proposals for camp safety had given Adrian a constructive outlet for his grief, and I hoped it would further shift his focus from vengeance to positive change. Yet beneath that hope, A sliver of apprehension lingered. Could this newfound purpose inadvertently grant him the very control he'd sought in darker ways? At 9 a.m. sharp, Adrian entered, carrying a slim tablet instead of his usual folder. He looked lighter, almost buoyant, as if the weight of his personal vendettas had eased. I greeted him and gestured toward the seat. He sat, placing the tablet on my desk, and offered a small smile. "I've been working on the presentation slides," he said. "I thought we could review them together." I nodded, intrigued. "Let's take a look." He tapped the screen, and the first slide appeared, a photograph of Redwood Lake at dawn, overlaid with the title, "Safe Waters, Honoring Nick Cross." Underneath, bullet points outlined the key goals: mandatory dock inspections, lifeguard certification requirements, and a foundation for bereaved siblings. I examined the slide. "This is strong visually," I said. "The imagery evokes both memory and action. What feedback are you looking for?" He leaned forward, eyes bright. "I want the tone to be compelling but compassionate. I don't want to alienate. I want to mobilize." I tapped a note in my notebook. Advocacy, tone, balance, empathy, and urgency. Then I spoke. "Perhaps you could open with a brief personal anecdote. Your last moment of joy with Nick B for transitioning to the safety issues." He nodded. "Yes, I drafted a script for that." He swiped to the next slide, a block of text in a simple serif font. "Read it out loud," he prompted. Clearing my throat, I read, "I remember the evening light dancing on the water as Nick and I paddled our canoes. He laughed when the waves splashed over the side, teasing me. For my cautious strokes, he was fearless. 2 years later, that same water claimed him. Today, I stand before you not to condemn, but to call for change." I paused as the words settled. "That opening is poignant, Adrian. It draws the audience in, grounds them in your personal story, and naturally segues to the safety call to action." He exhaled, relief flooding his face. "Thank you." And here, he tapped to the next slide. "I have statistics on drowning incidents at youth camps over the last decade." I leaned forward, reviewing the chart. "These figures are compelling, but consider highlighting the rate of decrease. In camps with certified lifeguards, it puts the spotlight on the specific intervention you're advocating." He adjusted the chart accordingly, nodding, "Good point." For the next 30 minutes, we collaborated seamlessly, refining language, choosing emotionally resonant images, and ensuring each slide balanced data with personal narrative. Every suggestion I made, he accepted with appreciation, and every idea he proposed demonstrated his commitment to meaningful reform. As we wrapped up, he looked at me thoughtfully. "Evelyn, I feel empowered. Not because I'm fighting a battle, but because I'm creating something lasting." I smiled warmly. "That's the power of purpose, Adrian. Channeling pain into positive change can be transformative." He glanced at the clock. "Next week, I present this at the camp directors meeting. I might be nervous." I leaned forward. "We'll run a mock presentation. You'll rehearse here, and I'll provide feedback on delivery and emotional pacing." His shoulders relaxed, and I sensed genuine trust in that simple gesture. "Thank you, Dr. Hart." Later that evening, as I reviewed our session notes, I reflected on how far Adrian had come, from calculated manipulation to authentic collaboration. Yet a seed of doubts nagged at me. Had I perhaps withdrawn too much, letting him steer our sessions? To ensure boundaries, but at the cost of my therapeutic influence. Now that he wielded purpose, would he drift beyond therapy's reach, leaving me behind. I reminded myself that effective therapy evolves with the client's needs. My role was to facilitate his growth, even if that meant stepping back from the driver's seat. Still, I resolved to remain vigilant. Purpose can be a double-edged sword. And I would watch for signs if advocacy slipped from healing into obsession, because, in Adrian's complex narrative, control had once been the enemy. Now it had become a tool for healing, and I needed to ensure it stayed that way. Thursday morning arrived with a nervous energy humming through the office. I set up a row of empty chairs, my mock audience, and arranged the projector and remote on my desk. The slide deck rested open on Adrian's tablet, its opening image glowing on the screen. Redwood Lake at dawn. Adrian entered precisely at 9 o'clock, wearing a crisp navy blazer over his charcoal sweater. He carried himself with newfound confidence, but I could see the familiar tremor in his hands as he connected the tablet to the projector. "Ready?" I asked, offering him a glass of water. He nodded, swallowing once. "Let's do it." I hit record on the desk's Cameron optional tool I used for presentation coaching. "Whenever you're ready," I prompted. He cleared his throat and launched into his opening. "Good morning, everyone. 2 years ago, my brother Nick and I raced kayaks across this very lake." His laughter then echoes for me now as a call to action. His voice was steady, but I watched his fingers tighten around the remote as he clicked through the slide's personal anecdote, incident statistics, proposed policy changes. I offered gentle guidance. "Pause here to let the data sink in. Slow your pace on the emotional moment." He incorporated each suggestion smoothly, his delivery growing warmer, more authentic. At slide 7, Daling recommended lifeguard certification standards. He hesitated. I noticed his gaze flicker away from the screen, as though recalling an earlier client's cold reception. I paused the rehearsal. "Is something on your mind?" I asked quietly. His jaw worked for a moment. "I'm worried the camp directors will see me as just another grieving brother, not a credible advocate." I nodded. "You have the data, the personal story, and the clear solutions. Trust that combination. Own your expertise." He inhaled, squared his shoulders, and restarted from that slide with renewed conviction. "These standards aren't theoretical, they're lessons from Nick's accident. I stand here not only to remember him, but to ensure no other sibling endures the same loss." The rehearsal concluded on slide 10, Next Steps, Foundation Launch, with Adrian's final words echoing in the quiet room. "Join me in honoring Nick's legacy by putting safety first. Together, we can turn grief into lasting change." I stopped the camera. He exhaled deeply, relief and pride mingling in his eyes. "That was powerful," I said. "You struck the right balance between personal narrative and practical action. How do you feel?" He smiled, exhaling the tension. "More capable than I have in months." I nodded, watching him pack up. Just as he stood, the phone on my desk rang. My practice manager, Jenna's assistant, calling to confirm Dr. Pierce's availability. I stepped aside to answer, leaving Adrian by the door. When I returned moments later, I found him staring at one of the empty chairs, fingertips tracing an unseen outline in the air. "Everything okay?" I asked. He turned, eyes distant. "I'm fine," he said softly, but his voice lacked its earlier warmth. I frowned, unsettled. "You look elsewhere." He forced a smile. "Just thinking ahead. After the presentation, after the reforms, what comes next?" I watched him carefully. This was the old pattern. Once a goal was within reach, his mind leapt to the next. "We'll cross that bridge when we get there," I said gently. "Right now, focus on tomorrow." He nodded, though his gaze held a shadow I didn't fully understand. He departed with a courteous nod, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alone, I reviewed the footage. His rehearsal had been impeccable, but there was that fleeting moment as glazing, shoulders tensing like a man scanning for the next frontier. I replayed it twice, searching for clues. As I shut down the camera, I realized our work was not yet complete. Healing and purpose could become another form of obsession if left unchecked. Adrian's drive for impact had given him direction, but I needed to ensure we balanced ambition with self-care. Tomorrow, I would begin session 10 with a focus on pacing. How to celebrate victories without losing perspective. How to guard against turning advocacy into another battlefield, because in guiding Adrian across the lake of his guilt, I had to remember to keep him and myself anchored to the shore of sustainable healing. And as the late winter sun dipped behind the blinds, I knew the real test would come not from his testimony before camp directors, but from what happened in the quiet aftermath when purpose, at last, met patience. I hadn't expected to feel this hollow when Adrian left. The mock rehearsal had gone flawlessly, and he'd be presenting to the camp directors today, armed with conviction and carefully honed slides. Yet, as I sat at my desk, the ticking of the wall clock sounded too loud an echo of the silent void he'd hinted at before leaving. By 9:30 a.m., I'd already sent a quick text. "Good luck today. Trust yourself." His reply arrived almost instantly. "Thank you. I'll let you know how it goes." I exhaled and stood, wandering to the small kitchenette. I poured a cup of green tea, something gentle to soothe my frayed nerves. As I waited for it to steep, I thought back to our last session. Adrian's gaze had drifted from the empty chairs, as though anticipating a new challenge. Purpose, I realized, was only half the battle. Pacing and perspective were the other. When he arrived the next morning after his presentation, my session 10 marked by a crisp calendar reminder, I greeted him with a warm smile and an offer of tea. He looked different. The confidence remained, but it was tempered now by fatigue, a subtle slump in his posture that spoke of long hours and emotional expenditure. "Morning, Dr. Hart," he said softly, sliding into the chair. He set his tablet aside. No slides today, just a folded handout of feedback from the camp directors. I gestured toward my couch. "Please, make yourself comfortable." He sank onto the sofa, rubbing the bridge of his nose. They were receptive. The board voted to review inspection protocols next month. His voice carried relief, but also weight, and yet I feel drained. I nodded, settling into my chair. That makes sense. Leading change takes energy. You gave your heart, and now it's asking for recovery. He unfolded the feedback sheet. They praised the personal story, the data, the call to action. But one director wrote, "Be wary of zeal overwhelming the message." He looked up, eyebrows raised. "She said zeal can tip into fanaticism." I leaned forward. "Let's talk about balance. You channeled your grief into advocacy. Powerful, but to sustain it, you need rest, reflection, and boundaries." He exhaled. "I've been living for this goal. I barely slept last week. I skipped meals. I cancelled social plans." His hands trembled slightly. "Now that it's happening, I don't know how to stop." I reached for my notebook and wrote, "Session 10, focus, pacing, and self-care." I set it aside and looked at him. We'll develop a self-care plan tailored to your advocacy work. It'll include scheduled breaks, support systems, and coping strategies for the inevitable stress. He nodded, relief visible. That would help. I guided him through a simple exercise, identifying 3 non-work activities he found restorative. He credited evening walks with his dog, a weekly call with an old friend, and his hobby woodworking model boats. Schedule those in first, I instructed. Treat them as non-negotiable appointments. Block them on your calendar right now. He pulled out his phone and began tapping. Walk with Jasper every evening at 7. Call Sarah every Sunday afternoon. Woodworking Saturday morning. I smiled. Excellent. Next, let's set limits on advocacy tasks. How many hours per day feel sustainable? He thought for a moment. 6 hours of active work, max. I jotted that down. Great. Then schedule no work windows, evenings and overnight. During those, step away from documents and emails entirely. He closed his eyes briefly. I can do that, I continued. Finally, build in emotional check-ins. After each major advocacy activity and meeting, a speech take 15 minutes to reflect. How do you feel? What do you need? He opened his eyes, a faint smile forming, like a mini debrief. Exactly. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a small laminated card, a coping toolkit we'd designed earlier, listing breathing exercises, grounding prompts, and a hotline for crisis support. Keep this with you. If you feel overwhelmed, refer to it immediately. He took the card reverently. Thank you. I leaned back. Pacing doesn't diminish your purpose, preserves it. You're not less committed by taking care of yourself. You're more effective. He nodded thoughtfully. I understand. I've been racing so hard to honor Nick that I forgot to honor myself. I offered a gentle smile. Your healing matters too. You can change the world, Adrian, but only if you're well enough to keep going. He exhaled, a sense of calm settling over him. I'll start today. We spent the remainder of the session creating a weekly schedule incorporating advocacy, self-care activities, and buffers between tasks. I encouraged him to check in with an accountability partner, his friend Sarand, to share the plan with her so she could gently remind him if he overstepped. As the session drew to a close, Adrian stood and shook my hand in old-fashioned gesture that felt grounded and mutual. I feel balanced, he admitted, like I can breathe again. I returned a handshake and smiled. Balance is the foundation of sustainable change. He paused at the door, hand on the knob. Thank you, Dr. Hart, Evelyn. His use of my first name carried warmth and trust. Good luck with the board, I said, and remember the self-care plan. He nodded, closing the door softly behind him. Alone in the quiet office, I reflected on the session's significance. We'd navigated the aftermath of his most public effort, shifting focus inward to maintain equilibrium. Therapy had evolved from exploring trauma to shaping purpose, to sustaining balance, and each phase had demanded new boundaries and strategies. I gathered my notes, the laminated card, and the feedback flyer. Sliding them into Adrian's file, I felt a sense of professional pride and cautious optimism. The intersection of justice and self-care was delicate, but we'd found a rhythm. As I switched off the desk lamp and prepared to leave, I thought of the calm after the storm, an essential respite before the next wave. And in that quiet moment, I knew that both Adrian and I had grown stronger. He, embracing sustainable advocacy, me, guiding with integrity across uncharted therapeutic terrain. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I felt confident. We could walk the path together, one careful, balanced step at a time. Ask ChatGPT. I arrived at the practice early on Thursday, rain tapping a soft rhythm against the windows. The seasonal chill seeped into the room, but I welcomed ITT, sharpened my senses, and reminded me of our work's gravity. Today, I planned to check in on the self-care routine and discuss any emerging challenges in Adrian's advocacy journey. Little did I know that beneath his newly balanced exterior, a storm was quietly brewing. At exactly 9 a.m., Adrian entered, hooded raincoat dripping, onto the welcome mat. His face was flushed, eyes bright but heavy with fatigue. He held an envelope in one hand, the edges crinkled as though he'd gripped it tightly. He set it on my desk with a deliberate thump. "Good morning, Dr. Hart," he said, removing his coat. His voice had an undercurrent of urgency. "I need to talk about something unexpected." I gestured to the armchair. "Of course. How have you been holding up since your presentation and the self-care integration?" He sank into the chair, running a hand through his damp hair. The balance plan helped at first. He exhaled, glancing at the envelope. "But this arrived yesterday. It's from the camp's legal counsel." My pulse quickened. "Are they contesting the reforms?" He unfolded the envelope and withdrew a single letter on crisp letterhead. "Mr. Cross, your proposal has been received with interest. However, certain liability issues have emerged regarding the camp's insurance coverage and potential financial exposure. We request a meeting to discuss modifications, or we may need to postpone the policy review." "Camp counsel," he let the paper flutter onto my desk. "They're stalling, citing potential costs and outdated risk models. My window for advocacy is shrinking." He pressed his palms into his eyes. "I thought once the board approved review, it would be straightforward. Now I'm back to square one." I closed my notebook and leaned forward. "I'm sorry you're facing this roadblock. How does it feel?" He removed his hands, revealing red-rimmed eyes. Anger is bubbling back up. "I feel betrayed by the very system I hoped to reform." His voice cracked. "I've worked so hard to channel my pain into action, only to have it dismissed." I retrieved the laminated coping card I'd given him and slid it across. "Let's ground ourselves first. Take a moment, 5 deep breaths, focusing on something in this room you find calming." He inhaled, resting his gaze on the potted fern by the window. Slowly, his shoulders descended. After a minute, he exhaled, voice steadier. "Okay," I nodded. "That's the first step. Now, let's explore how you want to respond. Do you wish to renegotiate with counsel? Bring new data? Share personal testimony?" He stared at the floor, struggling to articulate, "I don't know. Part of me wants to confront them with the full weight of my evidence, my story, the numbers. But another part knows that might backfire, making them defensive." I tapped my pen. Weighing options is wise. If we present too aggressively, counsel may entrench. If too meekly, they'll stall again. I suggested a middle path, drafting a brief letter combining heartfelt testimony with updated data, accompanied by an invitation for a mediated discussion. It would acknowledge their concerns while asserting the moral imperative. He looked up, faint hope in his gaze. A collaborative tone, then. "I like that." He reached for a fresh sheet of paper and began jotting notes. We sketched an outline. Personal impact. A concise, poignant paragraph recounting Nick's memory. Revised data. Updated statistics on drowning incidents since initial proposal. Mutual benefit. Emphasize how safety reforms protect both campers and the camp's reputation. Next steps. Suggest a joint meeting with me present as a neutral facilitator. As we worked, I noticed his lines smudging. He was crying. I offered tissues without comment. He dabbed at his eyes, voice quiet. It's hard to be patient again. I thought I'd left my old patterns behind. I reached out, placing a supportive hand on his forearm. Setbacks are part of advocacy. They test your resolve, but don't define it. Your balanced approach, self-care, pacing must extend to resilience in the face of obstacles. He nodded, wiping his cheeks. Resilience, he repeated the word as though anchoring himself to it. I paused the drafting and guided him through a brief exercise in cognitive recognizing negative thoughts, they're blocking me, and replacing them with balanced ones. This is a negotiation challenge, not a personal attack. He practiced aloud. This situation is an opportunity to refine our approach, not a failure. He closed his eyes, repeating the statement with more confidence. When he opened them, a new determination glowed. I'm ready to send this. I reviewed the draft. It struck the right balance, personal yet professional, firm yet collaborative. After fine-tuning, he printed the letter and sealed it in an envelope. I watched him address it to camp council before sending. Now, I said, we step back and wait. How long will you allow before following up? He considered 2 weeks. Then a phone call. I noted it. Good. That window gives you focus without anxiety. A moment of silence followed, broken only by rain against the glass. Then Adrian looked up. Dr. Hart, Evelyn, I have to ask, what if they refuse again? What if I have to escalate legally? I took a breath. We have your forensic consultant's path available. But remember your priorities: healing and systemic change. If legal escalation is necessary, let's approach it methodically, with full support and clear boundaries. He exhaled, nodding slowly. I don't want to lose myself in the process. You won't, I assured him. You've built a strong foundation: self-care routines, pacing, supportive networks. Use those to sustain you through any outcome. He stood, envelope in hand, a quiet resolve in his posture. Thank you, Dr. Hart. He paused, then added, for reminding me that balance is strength. I offered a genuine smile. Balance is enduring power. He donned his raincoat and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. See you next week. Same time, I replied. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled, aware of the tightrope we continued to walk. Advocacy and therapy, justice and healing, each step required vigilance, empathy, and unwavering ethical clarity. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Inside, I returned to my desk, pressing a finger to that unseen threshold between progress and setback, knowing that Adrian's next move and mine would define the course ahead. The following Thursday dawned clear and cold, the kind of morning that sharpens resolve. I arrived early, determined to create a space of calm reflection in my office before Adrian's session. The soft glow of the salt lamp and the faint aroma of eucalyptus set a tone of focused serenity. Today's agenda: process the letter's pending response and explore Adrian's emerging sense of purpose. Beyond his campaign, at 9 a.m. sharp, Adrian entered, his gait brisk but measured. He wore a tailored charcoal coat and carried nothing but a slim folder note tablet, no printed updates. His eyes held a steely calm I hadn't seen in weeks. He settled comfortably into the armchair, folding his hands in his lap. "Good morning, Dr. Hart," he said, using the formal title again. "I'm ready." I smiled warmly. "Good morning, Adrian. How do you feel heading into today's session?" He paused, exhaling slowly, anxious but prepared. "I haven't heard back yet from the council. It's been 3 days, which feels long." I leaned forward, placing a gentle hand on the folder. Waiting can be its own challenge. Let's use today to explore that space, what it stirs in you, and how we can maintain balance while uncertainty persists. He nodded and opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet, meeting notes he'd drafted for a future discussion with camp council, including proposed talking points, counter-arguments to potential objections, and a timeline for follow-up. His handwriting was neat, his notes systematic. "I've been preparing these in case they call," he said, tapping the page. "I want to be ready to negotiate effectively." I noted his proactive stance. Preparation is empowering, but over-preparation can fuel anxiety. These notes are excellent, but let's examine how preparing them makes you feel. Does it calm you, or does it keep you locked in a loop of what-if scenarios? He closed his eyes for a moment. Both, writing them down clarifies my strategy, but then I obsess over every possible response. What if they push back on my data? What if they undermine my credibility? I picked up a blank index card from my desk. "Here's an exercise in containment." I handed him the card and a pen. "Write down your top 3 what-if fears briefly. Then fold the card and place it in this worry box. We'll set aside the contents for now. This gives you permission to acknowledge fears without ruminating on them constantly." He complied, writing swiftly. "They reject the proposal outright. They discredit me personally. I'll have to go to court and lose control." He folded the card and set it in a small wooden box I kept for such exercises. "There," he said, exhaling. "I feel a bit lighter." I nodded. "Great. Now let's turn to what's next, regardless of their response. You've built an advocacy framework. What other avenues exist to further your cause, even if council stalls?" He thought for a moment, gaze drifting to the window overlooking the courtyard. "I could reach out to local media to get public attention, or partner with a non-profit focused on water safety, or organize community workshops." I smiled. "Those are all viable. Let's map them out, rank them by feasibility and impact, and choose one to pursue if the council remains silent. That way, you're not waiting passively. You're channeling energy into action." We sketched a simple decision tree on my whiteboard. Media outreach, high visibility; moderate effort, non-profit partnership, aligned mission, requires networking; community workshops, direct engagement, low cost. He weighed each option aloud, considering his resources and time constraints. Eventually, he circled community workshops. He valued direct connection and had a local contact at the YMCA. "Workshops it is," he said, voice firm. "I'll draft an outline for a 2-hour safety seminar." I tapped my pen. "Excellent. Let's plan key components. Personal story, introduction, interactive safety demonstration, and Q&A segment. We can rehearse those elements next week." He nodded, energized. "I feel empowered to proceed, regardless of the letter's outcome." I closed my notebook and leaned back. That's the resilience we've cultivated. Uncertainty may persist, but you have multiple pathways to pursue your mission. He exhaled, a sense of calm washing over him. "Thank you. I realize now that waiting doesn't have to paralyze me." We spent the next half hour drafting the workshop outline, assigning roles, and identifying materials he'd need. Life jackets, demonstration buoys, printed handouts. Each detail anchored him in purposeful forward motion. As the session drew to a close, Adrian stood and stretched. "Dr. Hart, Evelyn, I have a question." I rested my hand on the desk. "Yes." He hesitated, sincerity shining in his eyes. "Beyond advocacy, I feel rediscovered. Like this process has changed who I am. How do I integrate this new identity into my everyday life?" I offered a thoughtful nod. "Identity integration is crucial. Let's create a personal mission statement that captures your values: justice, safety, compassion, and integrate small daily practices that reinforce them. That way, your advocacy becomes part of who you are, not just what you do." He smiled, relief and excitement mingling. "I'd like that." I summarized our plan. Craft a mission statement next week. Identify daily rituals beyond workshops to live those values, such as journaling or mentoring a younger counselor. Adrian shook my hand warmly. "Thank you, Dr. Hart. You've helped me navigate fear, purpose, and identity." I returned the handshake. "And you've taught me the power of collaboration. I look forward to next week's work." As he left, I closed the wooden worry box and placed it on my shelf, a testament to his progress. Alone, I reflected on how therapy had unfolded, from nightmares to negotiation, from manipulation to mission. At this crossroad, Adrian stood stronger, with multiple paths before him. Outside, the sky brightened with the promise of spring. Inside, I gathered my notes, heart buoyed by his growth and mindful of the continuing balance between guiding and witnessing his journey. Therapy had become a partnership, one that respected both our boundaries and our shared commitment to healing and purpose. And at this crossroads of conscience, I felt confident that Adrian would choose his path wisely, strengthened by the resilience we had forged together. The sun filtered through the blinds when I arrived at my office on Thursday morning, casting warm, golden lines across my desk. I set down my tote bag filled with journals, handouts, and markers and took a moment to breathe deeply. Today's focus would be twofold: crafting Adrian's personal mission statement and refining the community workshop outline he'd committed to lead. Both tasks felt deeply intertwined, his emerging identity and his public advocacy. At precisely 9 a.m., Adrian arrived. He looked composed yet energized, holding a neatly typed draft of his mission statement. He greeted me formally, then caught himself and offered a more relaxed nod, one reserved for colleagues rather than patients. I smiled, acknowledging the shift in our dynamic. "Good morning, Dr. Hart," he began, or shall I say, Evelyn. His gentle tease signaled the comfort and trust we'd built. I gestured to the couch. "Call me Evelyn. We're partners in this work." He settled beside me and handed over the draft. I unfolded it and read, "Mission Statement, Draft I, Adrian Cross. Dedicate myself to honoring my brother's memory by championing water safety, empowering communities through education, and leading with compassion, integrity, and resilience." I looked up. "This is powerful. It captures your purpose, honoring Nikwile, emphasizing values that guide your actions." He nodded. I wanted it concise but comprehensive. I tapped a note in my notebook. "Mission statement, validated, ready for integration." Then I added, "Let's personalize it further by breaking it down into behavioral commitments. For example, each month I will host one safety workshop, or I will volunteer at least twice yearly with water safety nonprofits." He smiled, already jotting ideas beneath his draft. host monthly community safety workshops, volunteer quarterly at local water rescue training, provide pro bono counseling support to bereaved families. I caught my breath. He was thinking beyond water safety to broader compassion and resilience. These commitments will anchor your mission in daily practices, I said. Now let's turn to the workshop itself. How comfortable do you feel leading a group of community members? He paused, nervous, but I've practiced. I know my material. He opened his tablet too. The master outline we'd drafted. I projected the outline onto my laptop screen and reviewed each section. Introduction and personal story. 10 minutes. Interactive safety. Demonstration 20 minutes. Data and policy. Overview 15 minutes. Group discussion and Q&A 15 minutes. Closing. And resources 10-minute. Structure is solid, I said. Let's flesh out the transitions, for instance, how you'll move from your personal story to the demonstration. Clear segues, maintain engagement. He nodded, and together we scripted the transition. Adrian speaking. My story is why I care so deeply about safety, but stories alone don't save lives. Let me show you the life jackets we recommend and how to use them correctly. I tested his delivery. He spoke the lines with calm authority, then paused naturally before picking up the demonstration life jacket I'd provided. His movements were deliberate and confident, showing rather than telling. Next, I guided him through the interactive portion. Invite participants to try on the jacket, I suggested. Use open-ended questions. How does it feel? Or, what concerns do you have? This encourages dialogue. He practiced, asking me, how does it feel? As I slipped on the jacket, his warm, empathetic tone put me at ease. He provided gentle correction on adjustments, just as he planned to with community members. We moved on to the data segment. I reminded him, keep slides minimal, here focus on 3 to 4 key statistics, then offer printed handouts for those who want the details. He revised his slide notes accordingly, condensing text and marking where to distribute materials. Finally, we rehearsed the Q&A and closing. I role-played questions, some thoughtful, some challenging, and he handled each with measured grace. When I asked, what should we do if our camp can't afford new equipment? He responded, Adrian, partnerships and grants exist too. Offset costs. I can connect you with local nonprofits that provide funding and training. Safety shouldn't be a luxury. His answer demonstrated both practical know-how and compassion. I applauded his readiness. As the clock approached 11 a.m., we wrapped up. I turned off the projector. You're well prepared, I said. How do you feel? He exhaled, a genuine smile spreading. Empowered, like I'm stepping fully into this new identity. I nodded, and remember your mission statement. Recite it daily, morning or evening, to reinforce your values. The behavioral commitments will remind you how to live it out. He closed his draft and slid it into his folder. Thank you, Evelyn, for helping me ground my purpose in action. We ended the session by planning a check-in for after his first workshop, and I reminded him to continue his self-care routine. As he left, I watched him walk down the corridor with a sure pace, mission statement tucked inside his folder. Alone, I reflected on his transformation from haunted survivor to purposeful advocate, from isolated grief to community leader. Therapy had taken us far beyond nightmares and stolen control. Together, we'd built a foundation of identity, action, and balance. And now, as I closed my notebook, I realized our journey was entering its final phase, solidifying change and preparing for whatever lay ahead. Because true healing isn't a single moment, but a lifelong practice. And Adrian Cross, for all his intricate planning and relentless drive, had just laid the most critical cornerstone, a mission rooted in memory, integrity, and hope. I arrived at the Lakeview Community Center 20 minutes before Adrian's workshop, my notebook and clipboard in hand. The room was modest, a row of folding chairs facing a projector, a table piled with life jackets, brochures, and a whiteboard. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through high windows, dust motes dancing in the golden haze. This was the culmination of our work. Adrian stepping into his role as advocate, supported by the community he hoped to protect. As I checked my watch, 5:40 p.m., Adrian appeared in the doorway, breathless but beaming. He wore a navy button-down and khakis, offering a friendly wave to early arrivals. I stood and greeted him with a nod. No need for formalities tonight. He returned my nod with equal warmth, his mission statement printed neatly on a laminated card clipped to his presentation. "Folder, evening, Evelyn," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," I replied, slipping into a seat near the front. "You look ready." He glanced around the few community members trickling in, most of them parents and camp counselors, exhaled a steadying breath. "A little nervous, but the format feels familiar." I offered an encouraging smile. "You've rehearsed this. Trust your preparation." He squeezed my hand briefly, then moved to the front as the clock struck 6 o'clock. Introduction and personal. Story 10-minute. Adrian began by introducing himself. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Adrian Cross. 2 years ago, I lost my brother Nick in a tragic drowning accident at Redwood Lake. Tonight, I'd like to share our story so that no family here has to endure the same loss." His voice was strong, yet tremored with emotion as he recounted the lantern-lit memory we'd practiced. The room was silent, attentive faces reflecting compassion and concern. I watched him scan the audience, finding connection in each pair of eyes. When he finished, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle before segueing. "But stories alone don't save lives. Let me show you how we can make this lake and every lake safer for our children." 2. Interactive safety demonstration. 20-minute. He picked up a bright orange life jacket from the table. "This might look simple," he began, "but I've seen firsthand what happens when equipment is outdated or ill-fitting." He demonstrated proper fitting, tightening straps, adjusting the collar, his hands steady, his tone calm. Then, he invited volunteers from the audience to camp counselors to come forward and try on the jacket. He guided them gently, offering personalized feedback. "Slide your arm through here, see how the buoyancy sits under your chin." As I observed, I noted how he engaged each volunteer, asking open questions, validating concerns, and weaving in brief reminders of the personal story. When a young counselor hesitated, Adrian knelt to meet her eye level, recalling the image of Nick's fearless grin. If he felt safe crossing the lake, he said, "So can you." Her smile and nod told me he was making real impact. 3. Data and policy overview. 15 minutes after the demonstration, Adrian clicked to his slide on drowning statistics. He spoke with authority. In the last decade, youth camp drowning incidents have decreased by only 8%, a stark contrast to the 25% reduction in camps with certified lifeguards. He paused, scanning data on the large screen, then distributed handouts with key figures and resource links. I observed the audience leaning forward as they reviewed the numbers assigned. The data resonated. He concluded this section by outlining our proposed policy changes: mandatory annual dock inspections, a minimum ratio of certified lifeguards to campers, and an emergency response protocol. His voice was firm yet hopeful, emphasizing collaboration rather than confrontation. IV, group discussion and Q&A, 15-minute. Adrian opened the floor. Questions, concerns, suggestions. A middle-aged man raised his hand. What about camp budgets? Life jackets and inspections cost money. How do we secure funding? Adrian responded thoughtfully. Drawing on our earlier planning, I'm partnering with local non-profits that offer grants for water safety equipment. I can share application details with anyone interested. He then invited input. Would a group application through the YMCA make sense? Heads nodded. People exchanged ideas. Another counselor asked about training. Can we integrate safety drills into regular camp activities? Adrian affirmed, sharing a sample schedule. We'd developed in therapy, weekly life jacket drills, monthly safety talks, and an annual community swim test. The discussion flowed organically. Parents, counselors, and Adrian collaborating on solutions. V. Closing and resources. 10-minute. As time drew near, Adrian moved to the closing slide. Next steps and resources. He listed contact information for non-profits, links to training videos, and dates for upcoming workshops, himself included. Then he returned to his most potent tool, personal appeal. My brother's smile still echoes for me, he said. If each of us takes one step, wearing a life jacket, inspecting a dock, learning CPR, we honor that smile and protect our own loved ones. A warm applause rippled through the room. Several attendees approached him afterward, sharing gratitude, requesting materials, and volunteering to spread the word. I joined the line, offering my congratulations and observing how people lingered around Adrian, seeking his counsel. Reflection and debrief. Later that evening, we met at a nearby cafe for our debrief. Adrian's cheeks were flushed, his eyes bright with exhilaration. He unfolded his mission card, reading it aloud. I, Adrian Cross, dedicate myself to honoring my brother's memory by championing water safety, empowering communities through education, and leading with compassion, integrity, and resilience. He smiled. Saying it in public, standing there felt like stepping fully into who I want to be. I nodded. You were authentic, knowledgeable, and compassionate. You balanced emotion and data beautifully. He exhaled, swirling his tea. I'm proud, but also drained. I leaned forward. That's normal. You gave so much tonight, emotionally and mentally. How are you caring for yourself now? He paused. I planned to call Jasper for a walk, but it's late. His shoulders slumped. I reached into my bag and retrieved a small paper packet, lavender-scented herbal tea bags. Here, take this home. Brew a cup, then journal for 10 minutes. Reflect on what you achieved and what you want to nurture in yourself. He accepted the packet gratefully. Thank you. I reminded him of our self-care plan, scheduled evening walks, no work after 8 p.m., and a check-in with Sarah tomorrow. He nodded, determination returning. As we parted ways under the cafe's warm glow, I felt a profound sense of closure on this phase of our journey. Adrian had moved from private pain to public purpose, guided by boundaries, self-care, and unwavering ethical collaboration. But I also knew our work wasn't finished. Healing and advocacy are ongoing practices, requiring constant adjustment. and support. As I watched Adrian walk away, mission statement in pocket, head held high, felt ready to guide him through whatever came next, not as a clinician manipulating a case, but as a partner witnessing the transformative power of purpose and compassion. I guided Adrian to recount his journey in his own words, the progression from his first session, feeling tested and on edge, to taking the bold step of the field session at Redwood Lake, to drafting journals under threat, and finally to leading a community workshop. As he spoke, I noticed the shifts in his tone, from guarded to collaborative, from burdened to purposeful. When he spoke of signing the consent addendum, his first assertion of mutual boundaries, I saw the birth of his self-advocacy. When he described our guided imagery work with photographs, I saw him reclaim the joy and pain as unified memories rather than haunting specters. He paused after describing the workshop, then looked at me. I never thought therapy could be more than talking, but it became planning, creating, collaborating, transforming grief into something living. I smiled. That's the power of goal-directed therapy, blending emotional processing with tangible action. You've integrated your values, compassion, integrity, resilience into every step. He nodded, a glimmer of emotion in his eyes. I invited him to review the tools we'd crafted, mission statement and behavioral commitments. We revisited his monthly workshops, quarterly volunteering, and pro bono support. He affirmed each commitment, scheduling dates through the end of the year, self-care plan. We refreshed his evening walks with Jasper, weekly friend check-ins, and woodworking sessions. He shared that these practices had eased his anxiety and restored his energy. Coping toolkit, he demonstrated the breathing exercise and grounding prompts, reflecting that the worry box had become a safe container for fears. I asked him to choose one tool he valued most. He pointed to his mission statement card. Because it reminds me why I do all of this, he said. I nodded. Anchoring your actions in your why sustains motivation, especially when challenges arise. No journey is without its crossroads. I guided Adrian to identify potential future stressors, media scrutiny, if his advocacy gained broader attention, the risk of physical or emotional fatigue as he balanced professional responsibilities with personal growth, and the possibility of encountering resistance from institutions unwilling to change. For each challenge, we devised proactive strategies, media interactions, role-play press questions, establish talking points, and maintain a media coach's contact. Workload management, regularly revisit his pacing guidelines, use time blocking to prevent overextension, and employ accountability partners to flag early warning signs. Institutional resistance, cultivate alliances with sympathetic leaders. Diversify advocacy channels, for example, non-profit partnerships, policy briefs, and practice dialectical thinking to navigate opposing viewpoints. He appreciated the foresight. It feels less scary when I have a plan, he admitted. To honor our work, I invited Adrian to participate in a closing ritual, lighting a single candle on the table symbolizing memory, transformation, and hope, and sharing a final reflection. He lit the candle and spoke softly. This flame represents Nick's spirit guiding my path. Therapy gave me the courage to transform pain into purpose. Moving forward, I carry his memory in every step of advocacy and self-care. I placed my hand over his and added, this light also represents the support networks we've built. Therapy, friends, community. May it remind you that you're never alone in this endeavor. We extinguished the candle together, sealing our shared commitment. though this marked the formal end of our weekly sessions. I outlined a transition plan, bi-monthly check-ins, scheduled for the next 6 months, focusing on goal progress and any new challenges. Peer support groups. I connected him with a local advocacy peer network for water safety champions. Emergency protocol. We confirmed steps if he experiences crisis, calling his crisis hotline, contacting me, or utilizing the coping toolkit immediately. He signed off on the transition plan, expressing confidence in his ongoing path. As I watched Adrian leave my office, folder in hand, mission card tucked securely inside, I felt a profound sense of closure and beginning. Our work had navigated manipulation and morality, control and compassion, fear and purpose. We had traversed the depths of grief and emerged with a living framework for change. In the hush that followed his departure, I sat at my desk, heart buoyed by his transformation. Therapy, I realized, is not simply about healing wounds, but forging purpose from them. And as Dr. Evelyn Hart, I remained both witness and guide, ready to support him and others like him on journeys where mortality meets meaning and where the soul learns to chart a new course by the light of memory and hope. With the spring sunlight warming my office, I knew the true path forward was life itself, lived intentionally, courageously, and in balance, just as Adrian and every one of us deserves.